Why is the Chinese economy isn't collapsing yet? Many so-called China experts like Peter Zeihan, Chang, and the majority of the Western media have been predicting for the fall of China. However, China's economy is still growing, and it doesn't seem to be slowing down. Yes, it is true that China's GDP is no longer in double-digit growth, but the country is working well. Last year, China's GDP growth amounted to 5.2%, while the US GDP growth was 2.5%, and both France and Germany's GDP growth were less than 1% at 0.87% and 0.31% respectively. Chang, the China expert who published a book called The Coming Collapse of China in 2001, and he predicted that the Chinese government was the root cause of many of China's problems and would cause the country's collapse by 2011. Obviously, it did not happen. And now, another China expert, Peter Zeihan, stated publicly that this will be the last decade for China. According to Zeihan, China has at most 10 years left before its entire system collapse, and that will be the end of China.
So when you're saying that China has 10 years to go,
At most.
What do you mean by that?
Well, we now know that they've lied about their population statistics, and they overcounted their population by over 100 million people, all of whom would have been born since the one-child policy was adopted. So this is one of those places where they've got more people in their 60s and their 50s and their 40s and their 30s and their 20s.
Now, what was the logic behind the one child? Was it that they were overpopulating?
Mao was concerned that as the country was modernizing, the birth rate wasn't dropping fast enough, and that the young generation was literally going to eat the country alive.
And in this video, we will try to debunk why China isn't going to collapse anytime soon. First, we will look into China's real estate market, and then we will talk about the demographic crisis that Peter Zeihan has been talking a lot about. But before we start, please hit the subscribe button to show your support to our channel. The real estate crisis.
The second largest economy in the world is having difficulty picking up steam following years of COVID-19 lockdowns. Apart from China's real estate meltdown battering middle-class wealth, now there is also the growing threat of unemployment. Take a look at this next report for more.
On January 29, 2024, a court in Hong Kong ordered Chinese real estate giant Evergrande Group to begin liquidating its assets. The company, founded in 1996, had taken advantage of China's decades-long real estate boom, quickly becoming the biggest developer in the world. But by 2024, it had also become the most debt-ridden. And this does not only happen to Evergrande. More than 50 other developers, including Country Garden, another big developer in China, also faces loan default. The ongoing housing crisis has visibly shaken the previously unshakable Chinese economy, bringing down real estate prices and hitting the brakes on consumer spending. So will China's real estate crisis bring down its economy? The real estate sector and its peripherals have historically contributed between 25 to 30% of Chinese GDP. Almost a quarter of China's GDP growth comes from the real estate sector, making it one of the most important growth drivers for the country. However, this does not mean China's economy will collapse together with its property sector. First, it was China's government who popped the property bubble in the country. China's enormous population sustained a big boom in construction projects, so big that developers and local governments willingly went into debt to finance everything. This continued until 2020, when the CCP's current chairman, Xi Jinping, recognizing the unsustainability of the boom, passed his so-called three red lines policy, placing a cap on the amount of money developers could borrow to remain in business. And this means it was the Chinese government who initiated the real estate crisis. Second, since the government was the one who popped the property bubble, they have unveiled solutions to stabilize the sector. More than 50 Chinese cities have adjusted their home purchase policies by adopting measures such as easing purchase restrictions and encouraging trade-ins of urban residential housing to promote home sales and the healthy development of the real estate market. Third, China's property sector is fundamentally resilient. For instance, the average loan-to-value ratio of mortgages in China's major cities is about 40%, which means that housing prices will have to fall more than half to produce negative equity for homeowners, which means the house is worth less than the loan amount. This is not likely to happen. And finally, China is undergoing an economic transition where other industries such as green energy and electric vehicles are on the rise. In 2022, real estate in China has dragged its GDP down by 3.7%, but the rise of other sectors like green economy and digital economy have more than fully offsetting the negative contribution by the real estate sector. And this is one reason why China's economy isn't collapsing yet. With the country's property sector recovering, China will have a good economic growth prospect in coming years. The demographic problems.
Is the world's most populous country heading for a demographic crisis? China's population has shrunk for the first time in 61 years. What's behind the downturn? And what will it take to reverse the trend? This is Inside Story.
Now, according to Peter Zeihan and many Western media, China is facing a demographic time bomb. China is contending with a low birth rate and population, aging similar to Japan, with the added challenge of facing these headwinds before the country becomes rich. China's birth rate is falling faster than Japan's. In addition to the implementation of birth restrictions symbolized by the one-child policy that began in 1980, other contributing factors include the trend toward non-marriage and late marriage and declining female fertility. In both China and Japan, declining fertility rates have not only curbed population growth, but have also significantly changed the age structure of the population. For China, from 1980 to 2020, the proportion of the child population halved from 36.1% to 18.0%, while that of the elderly population rose from 6.9% to 17.8%. The proportion of the working-age population rose from 57.0% in 1980 to 69.2% in 2007, before dropping to 64.1% in 2020. This means that the demographic bonus that supported economic growth has turned into a demographic burden. So the question is whether China's economy will face a decline due to its aging and shrinking population. The size of China's labor force plateaued in 2015 and began to gradually decline, yet its GDP has more than doubled since then. Yes, China's productivity increase has slowed in recent years, but it has still managed to propel economic growth. And why is that happening? First, a decline in population does not equate to a decline in economy. Take Bulgaria as an example. Since 1989, Bulgaria's population faces a decrease, originally generated by a large number of ethnic Turks who emigrated to Turkey. Since 1990, Bulgaria has lost around 2 million people, roughly a quarter of its population. However, Bulgaria's GDP has been increasing steadily despite having a population decline. The same could be said about China. According to the UN medium projections, China's population will shrink from 1.425 billion in 2020 to 1.313 billion in 2050. China's share of world population will also fall from 22% in 1980 to 18% in 2020 and 14% in 2050. But India's share is forecast to be 17% by 2050. More important than this is the change in the age composition of the population. According to UN's projection, those over 65 will jump from 13 to 30% of the population. Those aged under 20 will shrink from 24 to 15%, and those aged 20 to 64 from 64 to 55%. And by 2100, the share of the over 65s will be an astonishing 41% of the population. This would be a country just full of old men and women. So how can China solve its population problems? According to famous economist Martin Wolf, there are two things China can do to maintain and even increase its workforce through internal migration and later retirement. The reductions in the labor force due to aging can be more than offset, at least over this decade, by moving workers from the still large farm population and by raising the retirement age. The urbanization rate in China is only about 66.2%. In comparison, the urbanization rate in the United States is about 80%, and Japan is around 92%. Hence, China still has plenty of room to move its rural citizen to cities to increase its labor force participation despite falling in population. Moreover, at present, the retirement age is still 60 for men, 55 for white-collar women, and 50 for women working in factories. And these ages can be raised to maintain China's workforce participation. Apart from that, industrial automation and robots also play an important role in solving the problem of labor shortage and improving product quality and labor productivity. China is the largest industrial robot market in the world. It accounted for 52% of robot installations worldwide in 2022, giving Chinese robot producers a key advantage in their home market. After going through all these, do you still think that China's collapse is imminent? The Western media loves to hype things up, especially about the negative news when it comes to China. Speculative analysts such as Chang and Peter Zeihan may be right about some of the problems China faces today, but that doesn't mean there's no solution to it. Finally, if the international investment community is so bullish on Japan, which has worse demographic issues, why not China? If you like what you have watched, hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe to this channel to show your support.